The hat that sparked it, or the bright yellow hat with a tiny sunflower stitched onto the brim, had been the little girl's favorite. She had picked it herself from a small boutique 2 days before their flight, a present from her mother to celebrate her first time flying first class. The girl's name was Leela. She was 9 years old, her braids neatly done, and her eyes wide with joy as she boarded the plane, dressed in her satin-colored dress, matching the hat that she wore proudly, as if it gave her a kind of quiet magic that kept her smiling as she walked down the aisle, holding her mother's hand tightly. Her mother, Dana, was dressed in a tailored navy pantsuit, polished but not flashy, her stride calm, her presence composed, but there was something else beneath her surface, something that made heads turn and flight attendants smile, just a little too professionally, as if they could sense they were in the presence of someone powerful. They reached their seats in first class and settled, and Lila's feet swung above the floor as she peeked out the window, watching the ground crew move about below. She was too excited to notice the glances being cast from the corner of the cabin. Not everyone had appreciated a child in first class, especially not a little black girl with a bright yellow hat, whose laughter was louder than the hum of the engines warming up nearby. Dana had noticed she always noticed everything, but she didn't say a word. Her focus remained on Leela, ensuring she was comfortable, offering her juice from her carry-on, and adjusting the seatbelt. Across her tiny lap, the flight attendant assigned to the front section of the cabin arrived shortly after. Lila had started coloring in her notebook. Her name tag read Marie, and her expression already carried a certain tightness that seemed habitual, not from a stressful day, but from a practiced tension of someone used to correcting others. Her blonde hair was tied tightly behind her head, and the smile she wore was professional but cold. She greeted the passengers, moving row to row until she stopped at Leela's seat. Her eyes scanned the child slowly, then locked on the hat. Without even acknowledging Dana sitting beside her, Marie reached forward and, without permission or warning, plucked the hat from Leela's head with a swift flick of her wrist. "This is inappropriate for the cabin," she said, her voice laced with the kind of false kindness that barely covered judgment. "Hats are not allowed indoors. It's considered rude," she added, placing the hat on the empty seat across the aisle. Lila's eyes widened. She froze, her hands moved toward her head as if trying to pull the hat back from memory. The color in her cheeks faded, and her mouth parted in confusion, not understanding why the woman had taken something so personal, so precious. Dana, who had been reaching for her tablet, turned slowly, her head tilted just slightly as her eyes settled on the hat, now tossed aside, and her daughter's now exposed hair, carefully braided the way Leela liked it, but now made to feel like something to be hidden. Dana stood without a word. She reached over, picked up the hat, and looked at Marie with a calmness that made nearby passengers shift in their seats. The temperature of the cabin seemed to drop slightly. "Is this your hat?" Dana asked, her voice soft but firm. "Or does it belong to my daughter?" Marie blinked, taken aback. "I was only trying to maintain order in the cabin," she said, still holding her clipboard as if it might shield her from what was coming. "Airline policy discourages loud accessories, especially hats. They can be distracting to others," she added, trying to keep her footing. Dana returned the hat to Lila, placing it gently on her head, smoothing it down and whispering something only her daughter could hear. Lila nodded slightly, her lips trembling, but she held Dana's hand tightly. Dana then turned back to Marie and said the words that would echo far beyond this flight. "I am Dana Carter. I am the chief executive officer of this airline, and you just put your hands on my daughter in front of a cabin full of passengers without her consent, and in direct violation of both safety and discrimination policies." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the hum of the engine seemed to hush itself as passengers glanced at one another, wide-eyed, some beginning to record on their phones, others whispering behind hands. Marie's face went pale, her hands shaking slightly. She stumbled back a step. "CEO," she repeated in disbelief, looking around as if hoping someone would jump in and correct the situation, tell her it was all a misunderstanding, that this woman was joking or lying. But no help came. Dana was already reaching for her phone, pulling up the internal crew protocols as she spoke. "Every flight attendant is required to respect passenger boundaries and diversity, especially involving minors. You removed an item of comfort from a child without parental permission, and then justified it by calling her appearance a distraction. Your badge, please." Marie's mouth opened, but nothing came out. The first officer, a tall man in his early 40s, approached from the cockpit, having been alerted by the internal cabin "System, ma'am, is there a problem?" he asked, his voice cautious. Dana didn't even blink as she responded, "Yes, there is. Escort this flight attendant off my aircraft immediately. I will handle the debrief and file the formal report when we land, and let her supervisor know to expect a full review, including her past conduct, which I already know includes 2 prior complaints of inappropriate passenger interactions and cultural insensitivity." Mary's legs barely held her as she was led down the aisle past watching eyes, phones now blatantly recording murmurs. Following her like a trail of smoke, Leela sat quietly, her fingers in her lap, her hat now tilted slightly on her head, her eyes looking toward the window but not seeing the tarmac anymore, her expression uncertain. Dana sat beside her, brushing her shoulder with gentle fingers, and said with a small smile, "You did nothing wrong, baby. People like her, they're afraid of color, afraid of brightness, afraid of anything that reminds them they don't control everything." But that flight was only the beginning, because what Dana didn't know yet, what even the internal logs hadn't revealed, was that Marie had been part of something much bigger, a quiet group inside the airline union pushing for a return to traditional standards, unspoken rules that had led to a rising number of incidents involving passengers of color. Dana had been monitoring it quietly as CEO, gathering reports, emails, passenger complaints, cross-checking staff behavior to confirm patterns, and now her own daughter had become a target. This time it wasn't data on a screen, it was personal. By the time the flight landed in New York, the story had already gone viral. The video shared by a college student in C2A had over 200,000 views in just 4 hours. Media outlets were picking it up, headlines calling it everything from CEO defense daughter to airline executive shuts down racism at 30,000 feet. But Dana didn't care about the headlines, not yet. What mattered was her daughter's heart and the larger storm this had uncovered. The airline was her company, but she was about to learn just how many enemies she had within it, and just how deep this sickness ran. Before it was over, someone high up was going to fall, and it wasn't going to be her. The whispered warnings in the lounge. Dina stepped off the plane with Leela's small hand wrapped tightly in hers. The moment they passed through the first class curtain, a quiet hush followed them, a wave of sidelong glances and unsure nods, as if the passengers now understood. They had just witnessed something far bigger than a child's hat being taken off, something that reached deep into the hidden veins of power, prejudice, and protocol beneath the polished surface of air travel. Inside the terminal, Dana barely paused at the VIP gate before security agents already waiting guided her and Lila toward the executive lounge. A private corridor opened quietly and closed just as fast, shielding them from the growing buzz outside. Dana knew it was only a matter of time before the incident flooded news feeds, social platforms, and corporate inboxes, so she had to move fast before spin and silence drowned out truth. The lounge was pristine, its windows overlooking the runway where planes moved like giant birds beneath the clouds. Inside, everything smelled like polished wood, fresh coffee, and tension. She led Lila to a leather chair, handed her a juice box, and kissed her forehead softly, promising everything would be okay. Then she turned and headed to the corner booth, where her assistant, Malik, was already waiting, laptop open, eyes darting across a screen flooded with notifications. "Already hit 4 major sites," Malik said, without lifting his eyes. Headline: variations, some polite, some calling it what it is, racism in first class, plus the footage has hit 5 million views in less than 6 hours. Dana sank into the chair, her fingers steepled under her chin, and her voice quiet but sharp. "I want everything logged, timestamps, passenger names, crew files, Marie's employment history, her connections, her complaints, internal comments, everything." Already pulled her internal flag reports. Malik said she had 2 previous incidents buried under crew discretion tags, which means someone internally protected her. "And I cross-checked the union records. You were right, she's been in communication with a few names from the legacy standards group. They're still pushing to reinstate old image policies, dress codes, grooming guidelines, even staff placement rotations based on passenger class types. Unofficial, of course, but we have meeting minutes from 2 months ago where her name came up." Dana closed her eyes for a moment, not out of exhaustion but from the weight of confirmation. What she'd feared for months had just bled into the open, and this time it had touched her daughter's dignity with a bare hand. Now she had the fuel she needed, but fuel alone wasn't power. Strategy was. Leela approached and slipped into her lap, quietly curling up against her. Dana held her close, her eyes fixed on the skyline while her thoughts raced silently. Tomorrow would bring meetings, cameras, silence from the boardroom, and whispers from behind office doors. But today, she still had the microphone, and she intended to use it before anyone could take it. Away her phone buzzed a private message from a number she hadn't seen in over a year. It read, "There already talking, damage control board is split. Some want your head, not hers. Careful. Dana, they'll use anything now, even this." It was from Jordan Blake, her former coup who'd been quietly pushed out after raising questions about internal hiring bias 2 years ago. His warning wasn't exaggerated. She could already feel it in the quiet emails. Not yet answered, the polite calls gone to voicemail, the shift in tone that always comes before betrayal. The airline wasn't just a company to her. It was her rebuild, her second life, after burying her parents, after rising from the south side of Chicago, after proving again and again that black women could not only lead but own, but inside the marble towers of corporate diplomacy, where smiles were weapons and diversity was a brochure photo. The truth often came too late. Not this time. She stood up, adjusted her blazer, and told Malik, "Send a message to every employee, every level, write it. From me, I want it simple, direct, and undeniable, something they can't dilute." Malik nodded, already typing. What should it say? "Tell them," she said, "that our values are not optional, that every child deserves dignity, especially on our planes, and that any employee who undermines this mission, whether through action or silence, is unfit for our future." Malik looked up, then slowly smiled. "It's going to shake them good." Dana replied, "It's about time they remembered who built this sky." Meanwhile, inside the operations hub, 2 floors beneath the main terminal, 3 men sat around a glowing conference screen, their expressions tight, their voices low. The video of the hat incident played silently in a loop as one leaned forward, his tie loose, his badge reading Senior Crew Operations Manager. "She's going to use this to clean house," he said. "We all know it, and if we let that happen, every one of our internal rotation privileges is gone. Legacy, Rootsgate, preferences, hiring discretion, it all goes." Then someone said something that made the other 2 glance around carefully, before nodding slowly. "We leak something personal, make her look unstable. Play the angry black woman card, just enough to make the board uneasy, make it feel like a PR risk keeping her." It was whispered, calculated practice, just like it always had been. Back upstairs, Dana received another text, this one with a private video file attached. It was from a flight attendant who hadn't spoken to her in 2 years, and the message read, "I was scared to come forward before, but this happened to me too, and it's worse." She opened the file, her hand tightening around her phone, and what she saw made her breath stop. It was Marie, again, this time last year with a teenage boy. On another flight, same expression, same voice, same excuse, different victim. The video had never been reported. The boy's name was not in the system, but Dana knew exactly what this meant. It wasn't personal anymore. It was a pattern, and now she had proof. The secrets buried in the walls. Rain tapped quietly against the tinted windows of Dana's private office as night swallowed the city skyline below, but she wasn't watching the storm. Her eyes stayed locked on the paused video frame glowing from her laptop screen. The image showed Marie gripping a teenage boy's arm in the middle of coach class, his expression a mix of shock and shame, while other passengers looked away, pretending not to see what they clearly saw. Dana's hand hovered over the trackpad, her thoughts racing. She knew the boy couldn't have been more than 16, and the way Marie had gripped him, the way she had spoken to him with that same sharp, dismissive tone, as if he didn't belong, as if his presence offended. The very air around her, it was too similar to exact. She clicked play, again listening to the short video. One more time, the same phrases repeated over and over. "Remove your hood, young man. It's against dress code. The airline has standards. This isn't the city bus. This is a professional airline flight." Dana's heart burned, her jaw clenched tighter. Every second, not just because of the words, but because of the passengers around them, who had done nothing, who had looked away or closed their eyes as if silence was neutral. The message that came with the video had been short but powerful. It read, "This happened to my son last year. I complained, nothing happened, I gave up. I saw your video with your daughter and I cried. Thank you for speaking up. Please protect the others." Dina closed her eyes for a moment, then reached for her phone and called Malik. Before he could speak, she said, "Gather every single incident involving Murray or anyone from her Union Circle, cross-reference passenger complaints with suppression tags. We're building a pattern. I want names. I want flight numbers. I want silence turned into noise." Malik's voice came back steady on it. "Already found 3 redacted complaints that match language, style, and timing. Even if the names were stripped, someone's been covering for her, or someone's been deleting data on her behalf. Either way, we'll crack it, and the union lawyers are starting to poke around. They've heard you're preparing a public stick. Them hear it, Dana replied, and tell legal we're not settling, we're not erasing, we're not letting this die like they always hope it will. Until it comes, I'm going live tomorrow morning, not just with my story, with theirs, every single passenger who was dismissed, every employee who was silenced every time someone said, let it go for the sake of optics. Smolik was silent for a moment, then said, they'll try to stop you, the board, the PR team, the internal watchdogs, they'll all panic the moment you go off script. Then let them panic, Dana said, and ended the call. Meanwhile, far across the city, inside a dim corner of the airline's internal legal department, a different kind of conversation was unfolding to senior legal advisors. One of them, a recent hire from a competing firm, sat reviewing sealed files. She's going public, one of them said, tapping the screen with 2 fingers. This is not a negotiation. She's bypassing the board, and the union's already on edge. The optics are bad. For them, very bad, and if she gets public sympathy, we're not just talking lawsuit risk. We're talking about losing control of the narrative completely. So we leak it now, the other one said coldly, her tone razor sharp. There's a reason they hired me. After all, within hours, a package was anonymously delivered to 3 media outlets. An unmarked envelope containing a decade-old photo, a scanned document, and a quote from a former business rival. The photo showed Dana, 15 years younger, at a private event, standing beside a controversial public figure. The document was a civil lawsuit dismissed without merit from her early startup days. The quote was vague but poisonous, something like, she always played hard, and sometimes played too far. The goal was clear, not to destroy her but to stain her just enough to turn her from hero to question mark, to shift the story away from her daughter's trauma and toward Dana's past, just enough to slow her momentum and cast doubt in curious minds. But Dana had prepared for this tooth. The next morning she stood behind a podium in the heart of the airline's headquarters. Cameras lined the room, reporters packed shoulder to shoulder, a few board members present, but silent, their faces unreadable. The video had already aired on major networks. The image of Marie tearing off Lila's hat was now burned into the public's mind, and the silence from the airline had made things worse. Dana took a breath, looked at the crowd, then began. Yes, my daughter was humiliated in front of strangers for wearing a bright yellow hat, a hat that made her smile, a hat that reminded her she was allowed to be bold and visible. She was told it was inappropriate, that it was distracting, that it didn't belong, just like so many others have been told before her. But this time the one doing it didn't realize who she was doing it to. And I didn't speak out just because I'm her mother. I spoke because I'm the CEO of this airline, and I've seen the reports, the buried complaints, the patterns, the policies dressed as guidelines but used as weapon sheet. Paused, letting the weight of her words settle before continuing. This is not just about a hat, or a flight attendant, or a moment caught on camera. This is about a system that has quietly made too many people feel unwelcome, unseen, or unworthy in spaces they paid to be in, spaces they have every right to occupy, and I refuse to lead a company that pretends that's acceptable. The reporters leaned in, scribbling, typing, recording as Dana went on. So here's what we're doing, effective immediately. We are launching an independent audit of all crew conduct and complaint resolutions. We are opening direct lines for passengers and employees to report discrimination without fear or filter, and every single leader in this company, including myself, will undergo revaluation. Not as a punishment, but as a responsibility, because leadership is not about perfection, it's about account. Room was silent, no follow-up questions, no murmurs, just a heavy awareness that something had shifted. But outside the building, as the press conference streamed live across millions of screens, someone else was watching from behind a tinted car window. Marie, her eyes swollen from sleeplessness, her hands curled into fists, resting on her lap, her expression unreadable behind layers of regret, fear, and something darker. She wasn't alone. In the car beside her sat a man she had only met recently, former HR insider who had been dismissed after quietly protecting certain senior staff. His voice calm, his gaze cold. He handed her a folder. If you're going down, he said quietly, take her with you. There's more in her past than she lets on, and if she wants to clean house, she better make sure her own house is spotless. Marie didn't open the folder, not yet, but she didn't say no either, because in her mind the line between right and revenge had already blurred, and she wasn't ready to fade quietly back in the office. Dana hugged Lila tightly, who had watched her mother on the live screen, her small hands clapping without fully understanding why everyone was so proud. Dana kissed her head, whispered, "You're my reason," and looked back toward the windows where storm clouds still lingered, but this time she felt no fear, because the skies were changing and so was she. The folder that could burn everything. Dana sat at her desk late into the evening, the skyline behind her glowing with city lights, as the world outside continued to turn, unaware of the storm building quietly inside her walls. She had barely slept since the press conference, her words echoing across headlines, television panels, social media reels. Her speech had been called powerful, necessary, bold by some, while others called it reckless, overreaching, divisive. But Dana was used to being called names when she told the truth, especially when that truth challenged comfort zones built over decades of silence. Moloch entered without knocking, a tablet in his hand and worry in his eyes. "There's been another leak," he said, placing the device in front of her. "Someone dropped this to the press 30 minutes ago. It's starting to spread." Dana tapped the screen and watched as images and documents unfolded from the past, a grainy photograph of her from 14 years ago, standing at a charity gala beside a now disgraced investor, a scanned court document from her first company's early legal battle, dismissed with no merit, but filled with accusations she had long buried and forgotten about, the footage of her confrontation with a rival CEO during a board dispute 5 years ago, edited and captioned to make her appear aggressive. The narrative was clear, the message even louder: tear her down, distract from the message, stain her character, and silence the change they think. "This will make me retreat," Dana said, her voice low, steady, her eyes scanning every frame. "Let them try." "Malik, do we know where it came from?" "Anonymous email address," Malik replied, "but the metadata traces back to a legal archive from inside the company. Someone is feeding the press directly, probably more than one person. And I found something else. Marie hasn't disappeared. She's been meeting with former staff members, lawyers, even a few current insiders. We think she's trying to build something, a counterattack, or a legal case, or worse, she wants revenge," Dana said quietly, "not just for losing her job, but for being exposed. She sees herself as the victim now, and that makes her dangerous. If she flips public opinion, if she turns the spotlight from her actions to mine, people might start forgetting what this is really about, and won't let that happen." Moloch hesitated before sliding a new folder across the table. "This just came in from internal security. We've been quietly reviewing old complaint logs, not just about Marie, but about the entire network she was part of." Dana opened the folder, and what she saw made her stomach twist. There were more victims, dozens of them, passengers, staff, trainees, people of color, younger crew members, all flagged for minor infractions that somehow led to demotions, flight reassignments, quiet terminations. The paper trail had been deliberately scattered, hidden in separate systems, but when connected they painted a clear picture, a pattern of systemic discrimination buried under layers of bureaucracy and protected by a chain of silence that reached all the way into the boardroom. "They buried this," Dana whispered, her fingers tightening around the pages. "They knew this was happening, and they let it continue, because it was easier, because it kept the old power structure intact. And now they want to paint me as the threat. We can expose all of it," Malik said calmly. "We take it to the public, full transparency, names, dates, everything. But once we do, there's no going back. They'll come for you harder than ever. The lawsuits, the press, the politics. You won't just be a CEO, you'll be a target." Dana looked out the window at the night sky. She thought of Lila asleep at home, her yellow hat hanging on the bedroom door. She thought of the little boy in the video, the passengers who never filed complaints, the staff who walked away in silence, and she made her decision. "Then let them come," she said. "I'm not protecting this company's comfort if it means sacrificing its conscience. Schedule a press conference and prep the files for release. I'll read them myself, line by line." Next morning, Dana stood in front of a different crowd, this time surrounded by the people who had once feared speaking up, young crew members who had emailed her in secret, families who had been mistreated and ignored, employees who had quietly watched as rules were bent against them. She brought them forward with her on stage, not as tokens, but as witnesses. Susie held up the folder and began reading, not her statement, but theirs, the stories that had been buried in databases, ignored by HR, overlooked by managers. Each story was a testimony, a thread in a fabric that had suffocated people for years. The press listened silently, the flash of cameras slowing as her voice carried through the room, every name, every date, every injustice brought back into the light, and when she was done, she looked into the lens of the live stream and said, "This is not just about one flight attendant or one mistake. This is about a culture that allowed it to happen again and again, and I will not lead that culture. I will rebuild it, or I will burn it down outside the building." The story began to shift again. The public reaction no longer split the videos of the victims. Their quiet tears, their brave faces spread like wildfire, and suddenly, the conversation was no longer about Dana's past, it was about everyone's present, and the demand for change became impossible to ignore. But in a quiet hotel room across the city, Marie sat watching the stream, her eyes narrow, her fingers gripping a printed page. She had received that morning slipped under her door in a plain envelope, no return address, just one sentence written in block letters. "She thinks she knows everything, but we haven't even started inside." The envelope was a confidential memo signed 5 years ago by Dana herself, authorizing a crew reassignment that had led to the quiet termination of a young trainee. The document looked official and damning, and if taken out of context, could be the very thing needed to unravel everything Dana had built. Marie smiled for the first time in days, not because she believed in justice, but because she saw a way to rewrite her story, not as the villain, but as the warning, and she intended to take it back at headquarters. Dana finished the press event and returned to her office, unaware that a storm bigger than the last was already gathering in the shadows, ready to strike, and this time, it would come not from her enemies, but from within. The betrayal inside the boardroom. Silent as Dana entered, her heels echoing on the marble floor. The walls were covered in polished wood, the tables stretched long and cold, and the seats were already filled with familiar faces, some masked with concern, others hardened with something sharper behind their eyes. As she took her seat at the head of the table, a heavy folder in her hand, she could feel the weight of judgment circling her like a quiet storm, waiting for one crack to split it open. She looked around at the men and women she had worked with for years, allies, competitors, cautious followers. Each had benefited from her leadership, from her vision that lifted the company from stagnation to global relevance. And yet now most of them refused to meet her gaze. One of the senior directors cleared his throat. "Dana, before we begin, you should know that there's been a development this morning. We received documentation concerning a crew reassignment. Decision made during your second year as CEO. It has been interpreted as potentially discriminatory in nature, and the media has already picked it up." Dana felt the folder in her lap grow heavier. She had been expecting something to surface, but not this, not a fabricated story, timed perfectly to appear when her movement was finally catching momentum. She lifted her eyes, calm but unreadable. "Please share the document with the group." The director pushed a copy forward across the smooth table. She took it and opened the pages, already knowing what she would see there. It was the memo, a scanned image of her signature authorizing the reassignment of a young trainee who had been the subject of multiple complaints for failing procedural training and arriving late to 3 consecutive shifts. But the page made no mention of those facts. It simply stated that the crew member was removed from rotation at her direction, and without context it looked ruthless. She set the document down and met their stares one by one. This reassignment was disciplinary, following a review by 2 supervisors, HR and legal. It had nothing to do with race, gender or status. It was based on conduct and protocol, which I trusted them to evaluate accurately. But let's not pretend this is about the document. This is about those afraid of what I've started, afraid that accountability might reach their own doors. The board chair leaned forward, his fingers laced slowly. "We are not questioning your intent, Dana. We are protecting the company from exposure. The media cycle is already framing this as hypocrisy. You claim to fight for equity, yet this document suggests selective action. If there are more incidents like this, it could damage everything we've built, including your position." Dana leaned back, not to retreat, but to recenter. She could feel it now, the familiar push of power being threatened, the slow turn from support to self-preservation. She had seen it before, in startups, partnerships, family, even politics. When truth became inconvenient, the system chose comfort, and now they were preparing to choose it again. "I didn't build this company to be safe," Dana said, her voice quiet but sharp. "I built it to be just, to be bold, to be better than the ones that came before. And if you think I'm going to step aside because someone wants to smear my name with twisted records, then you're underestimating just how deep I'm willing to go to fix this, not just for me, but for every single voice that was silenced before mine was ever heard." The chair sat back, his expression unreadable. but his eyes flicked toward another director who nodded slightly. "There is an emergency vote being considered, Dana. It's not final, but we have to discuss the possibility of temporary suspension until the matter is reviewed there." It was the betrayal not even masked anymore. Dana didn't flinch. Instead, she opened the folder she had brought and began passing out pages across the table, testimonies from passengers, flight logs, HR records, and a full list of redacted cases tied to the legacy crew circle that had protected Marie and others like her. She waited until each board member had the documents in their hands before she spoke again. "Before you vote, understand that I'm not the threat here. These records are the real liability. The ones who manipulated policies, who used their rank to shield misconduct, who drove passengers away and turned diversity into a slogan instead of a standard. If you remove me now, you're not protecting this company, you're protecting the rot, and history will not be kind to you." A long silence followed. Papers rustled slowly, eyes scanned words, too damaging to ignore the truth, now sitting in front of them, no longer buried behind codes and discretion. Finally, the chair closed his file, looked up and said, "We will postpone the vote for now, but this conversation is not over." Dana nodded once, rose from her chair and left the room, her pulse steady, her steps silent, but each beat of her heart was louder than before. She knew this wasn't over, that power rarely surrendered without a fight, and this fight was far from clean. Meanwhile, in the press room across the city, Marie was seated on a worn sofa, lawyer beside her, cameras rolling, lights hot on her face. She wore a blue blouse that softened her expression and a silver necklace that caught the light as she spoke. "I was painted as a villain," she said, "because I enforced policy and because I refused to be silent when I was targeted for doing my job. I was humiliated and discarded by a company that now claims to care about justice. But where was that care when my own complaints were ignored?" The journalist leaned in. "Did you ever put your hands on a child? Did you remove a personal item without permission?" Mary paused, tilted her head slightly and said, "I acted according to safety protocol. The rest is interpretation." The footage disagreed, but the damage was done. A new wave of doubt had entered the public eye, a split in perception, the kind that weakens even the strongest voices and shifts movements from certainty to scrutiny. Back in Dana's office, Malik returned with more updates. The airline's social platforms were on fire again, messages pouring in, half support, half doubt, the narrative beginning to fracture. Dana stood at the window watching a plane lift into the sky, its nose rising slowly into the clouds, and she wondered how many stories were flying above her, how many truths were trapped in cabins where no one spoke up. "We're close," Malik said. "This is when they push the hardest. This is when they lie the loudest." "Then let them scream," Dana replied, "because I'm not going anywhere, not until every single person who was silenced gets to speak, and not until the air we fly through feels as safe as we say it is." But neither of them noticed the new name trending online, a whistleblower claiming to be a former compliance officer ready to leak something massive, something that could tear the airline's foundation apart. And this time it wouldn't be a lie, the voice that shook the skies. The video appeared without warning, across every major platform, no trailer, no teaser, just a sudden headline that pulled hearts into throats. "Former airline compliance officer speaks out," full interview, and inside the 30-minute clip was everything Dana had suspected, and more: documents, policies, internal emails, directives from upper management telling staff to suppress specific complaints, especially those involving race, gender, or age, language that dehumanized passengers, labels like frequent complainers or image disruptors, assigned to people whose only mistake was being themselves in the wrong seat at the wrong time. Whistleblower was a soft-spoken woman in her early 40s, her voice steady as she named names, provided dates, shared evidence that linked multiple board members to the suppression effort, even revealed how Marie had been protected not because of her performance but because of what she knew about others. Her file had been marked as sensitive, and her complaints were handled in private meetings without proper documentation. By the end of the video, the truth was no longer fractured, it was crystal, and public outrage roared louder than ever. Reporters flooded the airline's headquarters. Protesters lined the sidewalks, holding signs that read, "Passengers deserve dignity, fly with truth, not fear, and justice in the skies." Board members scrambled to release statements, some resigning, others denying knowledge of the suppression. Dana, however, said nothing, not at first. She waited, let the world see the evidence, let the noise shake the tower until the old walls cracked open. 3 days Later she walked into the press hall again, not as someone defending herself, but as someone declaring victory behind her stood the whistleblower, along with former employees who had been silenced, passengers whose complaints had been erased, and crew members who had faced quiet retaliation but chose to stay and fight for a better future. Dana spoke with no notes, no script, just truth. You tried to erase our voices, but now we are louder than ever. You tried to bury our stories, but now they have taken flight. You thought shame would make me run. Instead, it gave me purpose, and for every child like my daughter, for every voice ignored, I promise you this change is not coming, it is here. The crowd erupted, the press lit up, but Dana kept her composure. Her words were not for applause, they were for legacy. In the weeks that followed, investigations were launched, settlements reversed, crew policies rewritten, equity boards formed, and the airline transformed, not because of profit projections or corporate slogans, but because one mother refused to stay silent, because one little girl's yellow hat became a symbol of courage, and because truth, no matter how long it sleeps, always wakes up louder than before. Marie disappeared from the spotlight, quietly resigning her legal case, withdrawn her final statement. A letter left on her lawyer's desk, admitting to some of her actions and blaming the system that shaped her. The system Dana had finally shattered. And at home one evening, as the sun slipped behind the skyline, Leela ran through the hallway wearing that same yellow hat, her laughter echoing as Dana watched from the doorway, her heart full, not just with love but with peace, because she had done what she came to do. She had cleared the sky for those who would fly next. The end.